The first scream was barely audible, more breath than sound, but it was enough. Sarge stopped in his tracks, one paw frozen mid-air, amber eyes locked toward the north end of the forest. A chill rippled through the pine trees, and for the first time in years, the scarred German shepherd didn't move away from danger. He moved toward it. 3 years ago, Sarge had walked into these woods a ghost. No collar, no tags, a patchy coat hiding a map of wounds, cigarette burns, blade scars, rope abrasions. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He didn't trust. And yet today, as dawn pushed through the Montana treetops, something was pulling him off his usual path of survival. He heard it again, a sound not native to the forest. It wasn't a coyote or a wounded raccoon. It wasn't the brush of a hunter's boots or the careless stomp of a tourist. This was smaller, fragile, human. Sarge crept forward, body low, like he had a lifetime ago in a very different kind of terrain. His movements were silent, calculated. This was the dog they once called Sergeant on the base, the one they shipped off and forgot after his handler disappeared. He no longer wore the badge, but the instincts remained. Under the thick limbs of a bent-over oak, he saw her, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, curled up in pajamas and a light jacket. One sneaker was missing. Her lips were blue. Her hands trembled even as she lay still. She was unconscious or barely holding on. Sarge halted 10 feet away, his breath tight. He hated humans. No, he feared them. The ones who shouted commands and threw fists when he didn't obey. The ones who chained him underground for months, who lit matches just to watch him flinch. And children? Loud, unpredictable. They screamed and laughed at his scars through cage bars. But this child wasn't laughing. She wasn't screaming. She was dying. He stood frozen for what felt like minutes, then finally backed into the trees. He didn't go far. He circled, watched, waited. When she whimpered in her sleep, just a tiny broken sound, he inched closer again. Close enough to smell the cold in her breath, close enough to see her cheeks wet with dried tears. Something stirred deep in his chest, something he thought was long dead. Not duty, not obedience, something older, the kind of loyalty that's chosen, not trained. Pine Creek, Montana was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and asked what church you went to before they asked your name. It was postcard pretty, American flags, 4th of July parades, a sheriff who still made house calls. But even in towns like this, there were shadows, and no one knew that better than Sarge. 3 winters ago, he stumbled into the abandoned ranger, stationed deep in the national forest, and made it his home. He hunted small game, drank from the mountain stream, and avoided every human scent like it was fire. They spoke about him in whispers at the town diner. The ghost dog, some called him. That big black shepherd with the war scars. The kind of story that faded into folklore unless you were one of the few who caught a glimpse. No one ever got close. Until now. The child began to shiver harder. Sarge stayed close enough to see her breath in the cold morning air. She moaned once, a soft, helpless sound. He wanted to walk away, but his paws didn't move. He wanted to retreat to the warmth of his den, bury himself beneath the station floorboards, and forget what he saw. But something about her wouldn't let him. And for those of you just discovering the extraordinary journey of Sarge and this lost little girl, make sure you hit subscribe to Heroes for Animals, because sometimes the bravest rescues don't come from humans. Her name, he would learn, later was Emma. But for now, she was just a shivering bundle of bones under an oak tree, clutching a broken flashlight that barely glowed. She stirred once and whispered a single word. Daddy. Sarge flinched. It wasn't the word, it was the voice. Faint, soft, and hauntingly familiar. That was the voice he used to hear when soldiers fell. When his old handler would kneel beside someone hurt and whisper something calm, something human, over the screaming. It was the sound of helplessness. The sound that once made him move without hesitation. Sarge crept forward another step. The girl's eyes fluttered open for a second. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared. Then she said hoarsely, "Doggy?" Sarge's ears twitched. He stopped, waiting. "Are you lost too?" And with that, the last of his fear broke. He lay down beside her inch by inch, not touching, just close. She was too cold to be afraid. Or maybe she simply sensed what he was there to do. When she shivered violently, he moved closer, until their sides touched, warmth. That was the mission, not escape, not defense, not attack, warmth. She didn't push him away. Instead, she leaned in, curling against his body, and whispered again, "Good doggy." He almost broke right then, almost remembered what it felt like to be called that. Not in mockery, but in truth. She fell asleep again, this time deeper, her breathing slower but still ragged. Sarge kept watch. The sun was crawling up the ridgeline when he stood and sniffed the wind. Smoke. Maybe a campfire, maybe more. 3 miles out, east. Too far to carry her, but maybe close enough to find help. He looked down at the child, limp and burning with fever. If he left her and she died, it was over. If he stayed and she died, it was over. So he ran. His legs hadn't moved like that in years. Swift, decisive, like when they'd trained him on the base, told him to find the wounded, mark the danger, lead the way. His body was leaner now, older, but his mind remembered every command he'd ever been taught. When he reached the edge of a clearing, he stopped short. A man stood outside a small cabin, sipping coffee from a metal mug. Mid-60s, beard, flannel, quiet eyes. Sarge stepped forward, slow, deliberate. The man froze. "Jesus," he said, lowering the mug. "Where the hell did you come from?" Sarge barked once, then again. He turned, walked 10 steps, then turned back. The man stared. "You want me to follow you?" Sarge barked again, low and sharp. And just like that, the ghost dog led a stranger into the woods, went toward a secret that would shake the town of Pine Creek and change 2 broken lives forever. Bill Thornton wasn't the kind of man who got pushed around, by people or by animals. He'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam, 30 winters in Montana, and a heart attack on a fishing boat. But nothing in all those years had prepared him for the sight of that scarred black shepherd staring him down on his own front porch. "Hell of a dog," he muttered, setting his coffee mug down and grabbing his coat. He didn't know why he was following the animal. Maybe it was the urgency in the dog's bark. Maybe it was the way he looked at him, like a soldier trying to speak across species. Or maybe it was the ghost of his younger self, buried under years of silence and solitude, stirring at the idea that something still needed him. Bill grabbed his rifle, more out of habit than fear. Whatever the dog had found, it was serious. That much was clear. "Let's go, boy," he said. "Lead the way." The dog, Sarge, though Bill didn't know his name yet, took off at a brisk pace, pausing just often enough to make sure the man kept up. They moved through thick woods and uneven ground, the rain-damp leaves muffling their steps. It was still, early, the kind of gray morning where the sun never really breaks through and the forest felt heavy with something unspoken. 20 minutes in, Bill's breathing got rough. "You better not be leading me to a squirrel, dog." Sarge didn't stop. Another 5 minutes and the trail curved around a massive fallen tree. That's when Bill saw her. A little girl, pale, barely breathing, curled beneath the gnarled roots of an oak like she'd been tucked there by God himself. Her pajama pants were soaked through, her hair tangled with leaves. A cheap backpack sat beside her, half unzipped. "Oh, Lord," Bill breathed, dropping to his knees. "Sweetheart?" The girl stirred but didn't speak. "She's burning up," he muttered, reaching out to check her pulse. "How long's she been out here?" Sarge stood beside her like a statue, close, protective, silent. "You stayed with her all night?" The dog didn't answer, didn't need to. Bill didn't waste another second. He dug into his pack, pulled out a space blanket, and wrapped it around the girl's small frame. "You did good, boy," he said, his voice rough. "Real good." Then he reached for the sat phone he kept for emergencies, the one he hadn't used in over a year. "This is Bill Thornton up on Ridgeback Trail near the old ranger station. I've got a child, maybe 6 years old, severe hypothermia, fever. We need med evac now." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the static. "Copy that. Sending Pine Creek Med Chopper, ETA 20 minutes. Stay put." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, brushing a wet strand of hair from the girl's face. She blinked slowly, then whispered, "He kept me warm." "Yeah, sweetheart," Bill said softly. "I can see that." The med chopper arrived like a thunderclap, blades cutting through the trees as the rescue basket dropped down. Paramedics moved fast, taking vitals, securing the girl, asking questions Bill didn't have answers for. "What's her name?" "Don't know." "Where'd you find her?" "Didn't." "He did." Bill nodded toward Sarge, who stood a few yards away, watching everything with a soldier's discipline. One of the medics paused, gave the dog a quick once-over, and shook his head. "Military trained," he muttered. "Look at that stance. He's no stray." Bill didn't argue. "He's the only reason that kid's alive." Back in Pine Creek, Sheriff Jim Calloway sipped his coffee with the steady patience of a man who'd seen too much and expected more of the same. When the emergency call came in, he was already dressed, boots on, cruiser warmed up in the lot behind the station. Emma Thompson. The name hit him like a backdraft. She'd only been in town a couple months, moved in with her stepmother after. Her dad, Frank Thompson, was reported MIA in Afghanistan. The kind of case that made your gut twist even without all the pieces. He drove straight to the hospital. When he got there, the scene was tense. A little girl in a hospital bed. IV drip. "Oxygen monitor. Fever burning high." And beside her, sitting calmly on the tile floor like he belonged there, was a battle-worn German shepherd with eyes that never blinked. "You the one found her?" Calloway asked the older man near the window. "Not me," Bill said. "He did." The sheriff studied the dog, the scars, the posture, the unspoken intelligence. "That dog's seen things." Bill nodded. "So has the girl." Emma woke up late that afternoon, groggy but lucid. When the sheriff came in, she looked past him, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Sarge. "Doggy," she whispered, reaching out. Sarge rose without hesitation and laid his head on the edge of the bed. "He didn't leave me," she said, tears forming, "even when I cried, even when it rained." Calloway glanced at Bill, who just crossed his arms. "She say who left her out there?" "Not yet." Calloway nodded, crouched beside the bed. "Emma, I'm Sheriff Calloway. I want to help. Can you tell me what happened?" The girl was quiet. Then, "We went for a trip. Diane said it was a secret camping trip, but she never followed me. She just drove away." "Diane?" Calloway asked. "My stepmom." Calloway's stomach dropped. "What did she say before you left the car?" Emma's lip trembled. "She said Daddy would want me to be brave." That night, Sheriff Calloway sat with a thick file folder at his desk. Inside were papers on Frank Thompson, Army Intelligence last known coordinates ongoing investigation, unconfirmed reports about whistleblowing on defense contractors. He flipped the page. And there, stapled to a hospital intake form, was the detail he hadn't expected. Child arrived wearing a set of U.S. Army-issued dog tags. Name, Franklin J. Thompson Unit, Special Operations Command blood type. O+ Calloway looked up from the paper. That dog hadn't just found a random child in the woods. That dog had found his handler's daughter. 2 days later, Diane Thompson showed up at the hospital wearing tears and pearls. She smiled for the nurses. She hugged volunteers. She played the role of grieving stepmother with Academy Award precision. "I just can't believe she wandered off like that," she said to the sheriff. "Emma sleepwalks sometimes, ever since Frank disappeared." Calloway didn't buy it. Neither did Sarge, who growled low when she entered the room. The sheriff made a note of that. Later that evening, when Diane left the hospital in a black SUV, Calloway picked up the phone and called a contact at Fort Carson. "I need to know everything you've got on Frank Thompson," he said. "Why?" came the voice on the other end. "Because I think someone tried to erase him," Calloway said. "And now they're trying to erase his little girl." Back in the woods, Sarge lay on the porch of Bill's cabin, watching the tree line. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew the mission wasn't over. Not yet. Not while danger still circled that girl like a scent on the wind. Sarge could sense the storm before the first drop of rain hit the porch. He'd always been that way. Could smell pressure in the air, could feel danger long before humans ever noticed. Tonight was no different. He paced on Bill Thornton's covered porch, eyes fixed on the winding dirt road that led through the pine trees. It had been 2 days since they rescued Emma from the forest. 2 days since the dog once known as Sergeant had found something worth staying for. But tonight, he was uneasy. Bill leaned against the doorframe behind him, sipping coffee from a thermos with both hands. "You feel it too, huh?" he said softly. Sarge didn't glance back. They say animals know when bad things are coming. You're living proof. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up 10 minutes later. Sarge didn't bark, didn't move. Just stood, rigid, tail low and still. Sheriff Calloway stepped out of the vehicle and approached slowly, nodding at the shepherd. "Evening, Bill," he said. "You're early. I'm always early when something doesn't sit right." Calloway looked at Sarge, then back at Bill. "Where's the dog been sleeping?" "Wherever he wants," Bill said. "Usually right there by the porch stairs." "Smart," Calloway said, then lowered his voice. "We've got trouble." Inside the cabin, while rain began to patter against the windows, the sheriff unfolded a small folder and laid out several glossy photos across the kitchen table. "2 men," he said. "They showed up at the Thompson house this morning, claimed to be federal investigators, said they had questions about Diane's husband, Frank." Bill narrowed his eyes. But their IDs didn't check out. Neither did the license plate on their car. When the deputies asked them to stay for clarification, they got in the car and disappeared. Could be a bluff. Could be, the sheriff agreed. Or it could mean Diane wasn't working alone. That made Sarge stand. He walked to the table and stared at the photos. One of the men, square jaw, short cropped hair, mirrored sunglasses, sent a ripple down his spine. Sarge didn't remember faces like humans did, but he remembered scents. He remembered pain. And this man smelled like steel and blood. His growl was low and steady. Calloway took a step back. "That tells me everything I need to know." Meanwhile, Emma remained in the pediatric wing of Pine Creek Medical Center, guarded by 2 uniformed officers and a very opinionated grandmother. Eleanor Thompson didn't suffer fools, not in her house and not in her granddaughter's hospital room. When Sheriff Calloway had called earlier to inform her of the 2 mysterious men, she'd calmly removed her knitting from her lap, tucked it into a floral tote, and pulled a small revolver from her handbag. "I knew that woman was rotten from the moment she shook my hand with dry palms," she said. Emma, curled up under her blanket with Sarge's old bandana tied around her wrist like a friendship bracelet, tilted her head. "Is Shadow okay?" she asked. "He's more than okay," her grandmother said. "He's working." That night, as the wind howled louder and the rain turned into sheets, headlights appeared on the far end of the dirt road leading to Bill's cabin. Sarge stood instantly, hackles raised. "Stay calm," Bill muttered, grabbing his rifle from the rack behind the door. Could be the sheriff, but the lights were too low, the engine too quiet. This wasn't a patrol cruiser. It was a black SUV. Sarge growled, deep, guttural, and unmistakably serious. "Easy," Bill said, but even his voice had lost its calm. The SUV rolled to a stop, just short of the porch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Diane Thompson stepped out, dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that didn't belong anywhere near a pine forest. Her expression was soft, too soft. "Well, hello," she called out with a warm smile. "I was told this is where I'd find the good Samaritan who saved my Emma." Bill didn't answer, didn't lower the rifle. Sarge didn't move. Diane's eyes drifted to the dog. She hesitated, but only for a second. "I heard there was a dog involved," she said with a forced laugh. "You're a handsome boy, aren't you?" Sarge's growl deepened. Bill stepped forward. "Ma'am, I think you'd better explain what you're doing here. She placed a hand on her chest. Is that how you greet people who come to thank you? I've seen people come to say thank you, Bill said. They don't usually show up in the middle of a storm uninvited with bodyguards in a black SUV. The word bodyguards made her flinch. What do you want, Diane? I want to take my daughter home. She's not your daughter. Diane's smile dropped. You have no idea what you've stepped into, she snapped. I'm beginning to, Bill said. That's when she reached into her purse. Bill raised the rifle. But Sarge moved faster. With a leap that defied his years and his injuries, he launched from the porch and slammed into Diane mid-reach. Her purse went flying. She hit the mud hard. Sarge stood over her, growling, teeth bared, waiting for Bill's call. Stand down, Bill said. You did your part. Sheriff Calloway's vehicle appeared moments later, lights flashing through the storm. He stepped out with another deputy, both armed. Diane Thompson, you're under arrest, he said calmly. For what? She gasped. For attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abandoning a child in a national forest. The deputy cuffed her and led her to the cruiser. As the SUV idled in the background, Sarge turned to Bill and sat, panting. You knew, Bill said softly, crouching down beside the dog. You knew what she was. Back at the hospital, Emma woke in the middle of the night, tears streaming down her face. Shadow, she whispered, trembling. He's in danger. Her grandmother sat up instantly. It's just a dream, baby. Emma shook her head. No, it's not. He needs me. Later that week, when Diane's arraignment made the front page of the local paper, people in Pine Creek started whispering about more than just the ghost dog. They started wondering what Frank Thompson had uncovered before he went missing. Why his daughter had been targeted. Why his military working dog had somehow found her. The sheriff, Bill, and a handful of trusted agents began quietly following the money trail, one that led straight to a defense contractor with government ties and a multi-million-dollar contract in jeopardy. But while the grown-ups worked, Sarge did something he hadn't done in years. He rested. He curled up beside Emma in her hospital bed, let her stroke his ears, and closed his eyes. Not all the battles were over, but for the first time in years, he wasn't fighting alone. The storm had cleared by morning, leaving Pine Creek blanketed in mist and puddles. Sarge stood outside the hospital's pediatric wing, his scarred frame framed by the low morning sun. His posture was straight, steady, but his eyes never left the door. Inside, Emma was sleeping, finally, after 2 straight nights of tossing, crying, and waking up to whisper his name, Shadow. Sarge hadn't heard that name in years, not since Afghanistan, not since his handler, Frank Thompson, went missing during an extraction mission that never made the news. The name had been used like a call sign, spoken with trust, with purpose. Now it came from a 6-year-old girl wrapped in hospital blankets and trauma, and somehow she knew. She didn't just name him, she remembered. Sheriff Calloway stepped out of the elevator and into the hallway, nodding to the 2 uniformed guards outside Emma's room. Report? He asked. No disturbances, the younger officer said. No visitors since the arrest. The girl's been resting. The dog's barely moved. Calloway glanced toward the window. That's because he's waiting. For what? The deputy asked. Calloway's eyes narrowed. For the next move. Later that afternoon, Emma finally woke. Her voice was weak, but clear. Where's Shadow? He's outside, Eleanor said gently, right where he's been. Can I see him? Her grandmother nodded, and a nurse cracked the window open just enough. Sarge padded up instantly, resting his paws on the brick ledge. Emma's fingers trembled as she reached out and touched his nose through the screen. You stayed, she whispered. Just like you did that night. Sarge didn't blink. She turned to her grandmother. Grandma, I need to tell you something. Eleanor leaned in, concerned. What is it, baby? Before Daddy disappeared, Emma said slowly, He sent me something. A box. Eleanor's eyes widened. Where is it? I hid it. In my castle. Eleanor blinked. Your dollhouse? Emma nodded. The tower, she said. I put it in the tower. He told me not to tell Diane. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Calloway and Agent Rachel Keller from the FBI stood in the living room of Eleanor's house, staring at a hand-carved wooden dollhouse. It looked like a medieval castle, turrets, flags, working drawbridge. Frank Thompson had built it from scratch during his final leave. She always kept it by the window, Eleanor said softly. Said it was her favorite place in the world. Calloway carefully opened the tower roof. Inside, hidden beneath, a layer of toy hay and plastic horses, was a small waterproof envelope and a thumb drive. He handed both to Agent Keller. I'll get these to the Bureau, she said. But if Frank Thompson really had evidence this damaging, we're not just dealing with an abandoned stepchild. We're looking at an attempted cover-up of a federal crime. Calloway nodded. And a little girl who's now a living witness. Back, at the hospital, Sarge sensed something was wrong before the humans did. The new nurse who came in to check Emma's vitals smelled off. Sarge rose from his spot by the window, ears high, body low. The nurse smiled too much. Her movements were too smooth. She avoided eye contact with the guards, and when she leaned over Emma's IV line, her fingers trembled. That's when Sarge saw it, a small vial she pulled from her pocket. He leapt. The nurse screamed as Sarge slammed into her side, sending both crashing into the tray stand. A syringe skidded across the floor. The guards burst into the room as Sarge pinned the woman, teeth bared just inches from her throat. Hands where I can see them, one officer shouted. The syringe was marked with a drug name no one recognized, but it didn't matter. The intent was clear. Someone had sent her to finish what Diane started, and Sarge stopped it cold. Emma clung to him that night, curled against his flank on the hospital bed, IV still dripping. You knew, she whispered, before anyone else did. Sarge blinked slowly. I don't think you're just a dog, she said. I think you're a soldier. The documents from the dollhouse turned everything upside down. Inside the envelope was a signed affidavit. Dates, locations, names, evidence of illegal weapons sales through a contractor named Vortec Industries. The thumb drive? Audio files. Frank Thompson's voice describing the operation in detail. Frank wasn't missing. He was hiding. 3 days later, Sheriff Calloway got a call from an encrypted line. A man's voice, calm but strained. You have my daughter? Calloway didn't respond at first. I have the files, the man said. But I need to know she's safe. Where are you? Calloway asked. I can't say, not yet, but I need to come home. I just don't know who I can trust. Calloway looked over at Sarge sitting by his desk. You already trusted the right one, he said. The next morning, the entire town of Pine Creek buzzed with rumor. The girl in the hospital, the stepmother in jail, the ghost dog turned guardian, Angel. People whispered about Sarge like they once whispered about miracles, but none of that mattered to him. He didn't want praise. He didn't want thanks. He wanted the mission finished. That evening, Agent Keller met with Sheriff Calloway again. We have a problem, she said. Frank's contact is spooked. Our operation to extract him failed. He's on the move again. Where? Possibly. Heading back here, to Emma, he won't say. Why come back now? Calloway asked. She hesitated. He said the dog would know. Calloway stared at her. What dog? The one who found his daughter. Later that night, Sarge stood by the hospital room window again. The rain had returned, but only lightly now. A misty drizzle that felt more like memory than weather. Emma stirred in her sleep. Daddy, she murmured. Come home. Sarge didn't sleep. He waited, just like always. The night before he returned, everything in Pine Creek felt like it was holding its breath. Sarge stood on the front porch of Eleanor Thompson's home, his eyes fixed on the tree line. He'd barely moved since Emma had been discharged from the hospital earlier that day. She was home now, resting, safe, wrapped in a quilt her grandmother had made decades ago. But Sarge knew better than to celebrate. Safety could vanish in an instant. That's how it had always been. Inside, the house was quiet. The TV in the corner was playing a rerun of Andy Griffith, volume low. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her tiny arm wrapped around Sarge's tattered collar, her new version of a security blanket. She refused to let go of it, even when she drifted off. Elilanar sat nearby with a cup of tea, watching both of them. "You're not just a dog," she whispered to herself. "You're something else entirely." At 2:13 a.m., Sarge's ears twitched. He heard the engine before anyone else. Not on the main road, no headlights, no gravel crunching under wheels. This was a softer sound, familiar. He stood and moved. To the front window, Elilanar, sensing the shift, set her tea down and followed. "What is it?" Sarge didn't respond. His body stiffened and he let out a single low bark, not one of alarm, but recognition. 3 minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. Frank Thompson looked older than the pictures in the news. Clippings, more lines around his eyes, more weight on his shoulders. But the second Sarge saw him, something deep inside him stirred. The man didn't speak right away, just stared at Sarge. "Shadow?" he said finally. Sarge froze. The name hit him like lightning. He took one hesitant step forward, sniffed the air, then touched his nose to Frank's hand. A whimper, quiet, sharp, like a breath broken in two, escaped. From the dog's throat, Frank dropped to his knees. "My God," he whispered. "They told me you were dead." Sarge leaned into him, burying his face against the man's chest, not with the blind joy of a pet reunited, but with the silent gravity of a soldier reporting back to his commander. They sat in the kitchen until dawn. Elilanar poured coffee while Frank laid it all out. The covert operation, the intel he uncovered. The arms deals routed through defense contractors, laundered and disguised through shell firms like Vortec. When he'd realized the scope of the corruption, he'd planned to turn it in, but someone got wind of it. The ambush came in the dead of night during a routine transport. He escaped. Barely. But when he made it back to the U.S., they'd already declared him dead. "They used it to tie off loose ends," Frank said. "I couldn't reach out, not without risking Emma." Elilanar listened silently. "She was all I thought about," he added. "I mailed those papers, hoping Diane wouldn't find them before Emma figured it out. She did," Elilanar said. "Thanks to that dog." Frank looked at Sarge. "I always said you were the smartest damn dog in the unit." When Emma woke, Sarge was already sitting beside her. "Good morning, Shadow," she said sleepily. Frank stepped into the room. Emma blinked. Then her eyes widened. "Daddy?" Frank knelt down, his voice shaking. "Yeah, baby, it's me." She didn't speak, just stared for a long, stunned moment. Then she ran and launched herself into his arms. Sarge watched, his body still, eyes soft. It was the first time in years. He didn't feel responsible for the room, but the moment didn't last. An hour later, a call came through to Sheriff Calloway. The FBI had intercepted chatter. Someone connected to Vortec had sent operatives to Pine Creek. They were coming not for Frank, but for Emma. They knew she'd survived. They knew the files had resurfaced, and they weren't going to leave loose ends again. That night, Pine Creek wasn't quiet. Sheriff Calloway had half his department patrolling rural roads. Bill Thornton came out of retirement and positioned himself at the edge of town with night vision binoculars. The FBI set up a mobile command post in the back of a feed store. It was the closest thing the town had ever seen to a lockdown. But at the Thompson house, things were calm. Frank was packing. "What are you doing?" Elilanar asked. "I'm not putting my daughter in danger again," he said. "They want me, I'll lead them out." "You'll be killed." "Not if Shadow comes with me." Sarge stood at the door, already alert, already waiting. Frank looked at him. "You ready to finish this?" Sarge didn't wag his tail. He simply stepped forward. They left just before midnight. Frank behind the wheel of a beat-up pickup, Sarge in the passenger seat. The plan was simple. Make enough noise, head south toward the state line, let the FBI pick up the trail. Lead the wolves away from the girl. They didn't make it 5 miles before headlights appeared behind them. A black SUV. Then another. Frank gunned the engine. "Hang on." Sarge stood up in the passenger seat, bracing himself. They took a back road, old timber trail, barely wide enough for a sedan. It was muddy, sharp turns, and thick brush. But Sarge knew the area. He barked once, sharp and loud. Frank followed the cue, turning left onto an overgrown path. The SUV behind them skidded, unable to make the turn. The second kept on. Frank took a breath. Then the second SUV rammed them from behind. The truck spun. Sideways, Frank hit the brakes, tires screaming. The vehicle slid into a shallow ditch. Frank grabbed a pistol from under the seat. "Let's go." He opened the door. But Sarge was already gone. The next minute unfolded like a war movie. The SUV stopped. 2 armed men stepped out. Sarge emerged from the darkness like a missile, launching full speed into the nearest attacker. The man fired once, missed, then dropped as Sarge clamped down on his arm with terrifying precision. Frank took down the second man with 2 quick shots. Disarming, not lethal. The forest fell silent, blood mixed with mud. But Sarge was still, standing, barely. His side was bleeding. Frank rushed over. No, Shadow." Sarge didn't whine, didn't collapse. He leaned his weight against Frank, looked him in the eyes, and nodded. Just once, like mission complete. At the hospital, they rushed him in with sirens blaring. Emma was already there, having been relocated under protective watch. When she saw him wheeled in, limp but alive, she screamed his name. "Shadow!" He lifted his head slightly. That was enough. They said recovery would be slow, that most dogs his age wouldn't pull through. But Sarge was never most dogs. The bullet had passed through his flank. Clean, but painful. They said he'd limp for life. Emma told them he was allowed. "Heroes don't need to run fast," she said. "They just need to come back." 3 days later, Frank stood in the hospital hallway looking through the glass as his daughter slept. Sarge curled at her feet. Calloway stepped beside him. "FBI's wrapped the case," he said. "Vortex done. Multiple arrests. The evidence your daughter hid in a dollhouse might have saved lives." Frank nodded. "Anything else I can do?" the sheriff asked. Frank looked toward Sarge. "Yeah," he said. "Help me adopt that dog officially. He's not just a war hero anymore." Calloway smiled. "He's family." Spring came early to Pine Creek. It crept in softly, melting the last of the snow from the ridgeline, dusting the trees in a pale green haze, and warming the soil enough to bring wildflowers back to life. The whole town seemed to exhale after a long winter of secrets, sirens, and shadows. Sarge lay on the front porch of Eleanor Thompson's house, his chin resting between his front paws, his scarred eyes watching the road like it still owed him something. The limp in his back leg was permanent now. The bullet wound had healed, but not cleanly. Every step was slower, every jump more calculated, but no one in Pine Creek doubted the strength that remained in him. He was still the protector, the soldier, the dog who came back from the dead. Inside the house, Emma was getting ready for school. It had been 3 weeks since the final arrests, connected to the Vortex scandal. National news had moved on, the feds had packed up and reporters stopped calling. But in the Thompson home, things were just beginning to settle into something close to normal. Frank stood by the stove, flipping pancakes badly. His sleeves were rolled up. His military posture was still there, but looser now. Softer. "Dad, you're burning them again." Emma giggled, her backpack already on. He flipped one pancake in the air, caught it half folded, and shrugged. "I was trained to defuse explosives, not cook breakfast." Emma smiled and grabbed an apple instead. "Shadow wants to walk me to the bus," she said. "Course he does," Frank replied. "That dog's more punctual than the Marines." Every morning, Sarge walked Emma to the edge of the road where the school bus turned up the hill. He never crossed the yellow line, just stood there watching until the doors closed and the bus pulled away. Only then would he turn and head back home, slow but proud. Today, Emma gave him a long hug before boarding, her hands wrapped around his neck, fingers brushing the tattered edge of the collar he'd worn through battles and blizzards. "Be good while I'm gone," she whispered. "No chasing squirrels." Sarge gave a soft huff in response. As the bus pulled away, Frank stepped beside him. "You really don't miss a thing, do you?" Sarge didn't look away. His ears flicked once. On alert. Always. Frank let out a breath. "Me neither." That afternoon, Sheriff Calloway stopped by the house bringing a manila envelope and a tired smile. "Got something for you," he told Frank, handing him the papers. Frank opened it slowly. Adoption documents, official and stamped. The name at the top, Sarge, formerly Shadow. "He's yours," Calloway said. "No red tape, no more military files, no tracking chip. He's free. And he's home." Frank looked down at the dog lying beside the porch swing, his head tilted, eyes tired but focused. "Thanks," Frank said. "He's earned it." That night, as the sun set over the mountains and the air cooled just enough to see your breath, Frank stood in the yard alone, gazing up at the sky. The stars were coming, out one by one. Sarge padded out to join him, slow but steady. "Didn't think I'd ever come back here," Frank said softly. "Didn't think I'd ever be a dad again, or a son, or anything more than a ghost." Sarge lay beside his feet. "I owe you," Frank whispered. "Not just for saving Emma, but for never giving up." The dog's eyes flicked upward. A slow blink. Then he rested his head against Frank's boot. No words, no ceremony, just understanding. 2 weeks later, Pine Creek Elementary hosted its annual Hero Day assembly. Normally it was a small event. Local firefighters, retired veterans, maybe the town's one EMT with a working defibrillator. But this year, the gym was packed. The principal cleared her throat at the microphone. "Today, we honor someone who didn't wear a uniform but still fought a war, someone who didn't carry a weapon but protected one of our own, a soldier with 4 legs and the heart of a lion." The side door opened. Emma stepped in, holding Sarge's leash. The entire gym fell silent. Children gasped. Parents stood. A few people even wiped tears. Sarge walked with a slow, deliberate limp, head held high, ears perked, not because he wanted the attention, but because Emma did, and where she went he followed, always. The children gathered around him afterward, touching his ears, asking 1,000 questions. He sat quietly, letting them. He wasn't afraid anymore, not of hands, not of noise, not of the past, because he'd already been through the worst and he'd come out the other side. That evening, Bill Thornton stopped by the house. He didn't come often anymore, said it was Sarge's job now, but tonight he brought a small wooden box. "Had this made," he said, handing it to Emma. Inside was a polished brass tag mounted on a strip of reclaimed wood. It read, "Sergeant Sarge, MWD ST7623, loyal beyond duty, brave beyond fear. Home at last." Emma hugged the box tight. Sarge nosed her arm gently. Time passed. The seasons turned. Sarge didn't chase tennis balls anymore. Didn't run full speed through the backyard like he once did, but every night he lay on the floor beside Emma's bed, one ear always tilted toward the door. On summer evenings, Frank would sit on the porch with him, beer in hand, watching the stars come out. They never spoke much. They didn't need to. On Sundays, they'd walk by the edge of the woods together, where the trees still whispered of that night, the night Sarge chose love over fear, purpose over pain. He'd been abandoned once, but he'd never been alone again. Years later, when Emma was asked to write a college essay about a hero who changed your life, she didn't hesitate. She titled it, "The Dog Who Stayed." Thank you for following this emotional journey of loyalty, courage, and healing. We hope the story of Sarge reminded you that even the most wounded among us can become protectors, and that sometimes family isn't who we're born to, but who we choose. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What would you have named the dog if you had found him in the forest that day? Would you have trusted him? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real and inspired stories at Heroes for Animals.